Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for the Local Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategies webinar. This is being delivered by BEST for the Scottish Cities Alliance and our local authorities colleagues as part of support we are offering. My name is Sarah Buchanan and I'm going to be your host for today. I'm an impact manager in the retrofit team at BEST, and my colleague Kirsty from the digital team is also going to join us for the panel session. I'd like to welcome our three speakers for today. We've got Stephen Strachan, the Principal Consultant from Changeworks, Marjan van de Beek, who's our Senior Data Consultant from Changeworks, and we have Stewart from IRT Surveys. I will do a short introduction as each speaker comes to present. We'll also do, of course, a bit of housekeeping, as always with webinars. So today's session is going to be recorded and available on YouTube next week. We'd really like to get you involved. Please do ask questions. You can make comments and ask questions on the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. There will be a couple of poll questions. We like to keep it really interactive, so please do let us know your thoughts. And your feedback is extremely valuable, so please do feedback to us in our short survey at the end. It really helps us improve our webinars and keep our content fresh and to offer support. So I think we're going to move on to our first poll of the session. Do you feel confident your data is obviously a huge part of the LHEES delivery? Yes, your data and reporting is your confidence at a high standard. You're in the process of collating your data. You actually need a bit of support to get that kind of data processing started, or you're a bit unsure of where to start. So where are you in terms of the kind of data gathering element of your LHEES strategy? And this will allow us to make sure that we're offering support that's going to help you identify where you need the most support. So yeah, that'll take a few seconds, a couple of minutes, just to get the poll up on the screen, and it'll give us a sense of where everybody's at. Fantastic, so got 50%, you're more than ready to go, and then we've got about another 50% who are either in the process of collating or you're looking for support, so thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our next couple of speakers. They're just going to follow on with their presentations rather than me coming back in to do an introduction. We've got Stephen Strachan from Changeworks. He was involved in the early delivery of the pilot of the LHEES, so a really good expert, critical friend. He's an experienced project manager and technical consultant with over 15 years in the sustainability arena. He obviously develops and manages opportunities for Changeworks, so really a good person to know. Great to have you on the webinar, thank you. And following his presentation, he'll just smoothly hand over to Marjan van de Beek, Senior Data Consultant who leads the data team at Changeworks. She's managed the data analysis for over 15 LHEES projects at Changeworks, and also combines her expertise in data analysis with data visualization to really help local authorities look at kind of different areas of funding. So we'll look forward to hearing from both of you. Thank you. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks very much. Afternoon, everyone. Hope it's nice and sunny where you all are as well. So I'll just quickly get fired into this. First of all, I'll tell you who we are, who Changeworks are. So if you don't know Changeworks and you haven't worked with us before, Changeworks are Scotland's leading environmental charity, and we essentially have a focus in delivery around decarbonisation of heat and improving energy efficiency with a primary focus on the domestic stock, so looking mostly at housing. We have a good spread in terms of what we'll do, so we'll do everything from managing the Home Energy Scotland advice centres for South East Scotland and Highlands and Islands, as well as affordable warmth services and supporting tenants and householders with potential risk of fuel poverty. Community Energy Scotland, again looking at developing community-based renewable projects and low carbon heat projects, and then sort of more linked to LHEES is the project management services, where we're delivering and we deliver say ESAB projects for 7 local authorities, as well as consultancy services, which is where Marjan and I sit, where we have a focus on sort of net zero pathways and consumer insights and behaviours, and LHEES kind of fits quite nicely into the net zero pathways side of things. So We have a 3-year strategic plan, of which we've got pretty high targets set for decarbonising the domestic housing stock across Scotland. And why? Essentially, it's because of the sort of trilemma aspect of energy sustainability, affordability, and energy security. And what we are very focused on is this urgent focus and growth in the market to look at improvement of a stock. Again, we've been doing this for a long time. For over 35 years, we've been working with domestic housing and improving energy efficiency all the way back from when we used to be Lothian Edinburgh Environmental Partnership, or LEEP, that was, as I say, 35 years ago. So, LHEES, and where does this all fit in? We essentially have, through Scottish Government, there is that high level target of net zero carbon by 2045 and domestic social housing by 2040. Net zero carbon essentially can be translated as a few different things. It could be where it's a zero carbon emissions heating system on site, which is looking at, say, electrification of heat, so heat pumps potentially. And then it also could be looked at, we need to consider fabric efficiency as well. So a kind of net zero definition might be something like a 70% reduction in demand of a property. What this means though is that then Scottish Government then have essentially decided that we need to have a structured strategy in place at local authority level to try and take on the energy efficiency and decarbonisation of heat across the whole built environment within that local authority area. So the idea being is that this, as it says in that definition there, it's about this kind of locally led, place-based, how do we address the built environment, and what's our sort of strategy, 20-year strategy, 25-year strategy to get towards 2045 with that high level target of net zero. There are some carrots. There's a bit of support from Scottish Government, so looking at Energy Efficient Scotland and the area-based schemes and various loans and so on for owner-occupiers and such like, and then also looking at social housing, net zero housing fund for any housing associations or local authorities for their own housing stock, as well as that there have been previous iterations of things like LCITP, Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme, which is more for larger projects and potentially for heat networks and so on, looking at primarily maybe the non-domestic estate within a council's assets. Then we also have sticks that we have to bear in mind. So we've got things like the EIS2, so Energy Efficiency Standard for Social Housing, and the second iteration of that, which at the moment, it's in discussion, but at the moment it's essentially been set for all social housing to achieve an EPC B by 2032, and then the Energy Efficient Scotland route map, of which there is there are set targets primarily focused on EPCs and EPC scores and energy efficiency ratings in that way for all tenures and all buildings, with set years associated with that. Whether they quite match up to net zero is potentially debatable, particularly as that we're using fairly blunt tools in the form of RDSAP to assess the efficiency of the properties. So the LHEES itself is the statutory requirement for all local authorities, of which there is a requirement by the end of this year to have published a first draft of the strategy and the delivery plan. It really is to align with the Energy Efficient Scotland route map, and it has to, again, the big change for local authorities is that it needs to include all sectors and all tenures over this sort of 20-year time frame. So that the big point there is that there will be a lot of properties which are within more direct control, such as their own non-domestic estate, as well as ones that are less in control, so privately owned businesses or owner occupiers and properties. And then it's about trying to build in a strategy for decarbonisation of heat across all of those. What's been happening so far is that we have gone from 2017, we had initial consultation and pilot phase, of which then through to 2019 there was initial development and testing of different approaches to LHEES. So whether it was approached as an area based, so taking a town for example, or a whole local authority area, or whether it was looking at sort of into 2022 there was the more kind of tenure based or type LHEES coming in. So maybe you'd have a focus on owner-occupiers or private renter, or potentially there were some that had focus on particular demographics, so looking at areas that were at higher risk of fuel poverty and so on. Then through 2023, we're now at the point where we have a standardised methodology that's been developed and has now been published by Scottish Government, and again, as I said, all local authorities to have the outline draft document produced by the end of this year. And then into 2024, essentially the LHEES is going to be a bit of an adaptable beast, is that there are going to be some areas where more focus is brought into. So say, for example, just now, we can look at, and we maybe have enough information on the domestic stock that we can create a more detailed plan, a more detailed strategy on those, whereas a lot of the non-domestic, there's still more investigation to take place, there's more engagement to happen, so before we get to that point, we're comfortable to be able to develop or to have a delivery plan for that. Which means that throughout the next few years, there's going to be quite a bit of work on just refining the strategy and delivery plan itself, of which there is funding from Scottish Government to support that for a 5-year commitment for £75,000 for each local authority. And then we consider what we've been done and what Changeworks has done over the last few years, which has given us quite a good view of different local authorities and different priorities and so on, is that we've worked across 23 local authorities since the initial pilot phase, covering a fair chunk of Scotland geographically, which has given us, again, quite an insight into different approaches and different things that we can do specifically local to those areas. Again, an urban LHEES is going to look quite different to a rural LHEES. And I will now pass over to Marjan, who's just sitting to the side of me here.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll do the slide manipulation on your computer. So the government has developed with Zero Waste Scotland a standard methodology that the local authorities can use to get to these two final products of having a strategy and those delivery plans in place. So if the strategy focuses on the what and where, what can be done and where mostly in this local authority area, in terms of heat decarbonisation and energy efficiency work, that's very much the strategy. And then the delivery plans will specify which stakeholders are going to be mostly involved, when it's going to be done, and how is there, certain kinds of funding that will be able to make these things happen quickly, for example. But before those two documents can be made, there's a lot of work underneath there. So it starts with a policy and strategy review, how the local policies differ maybe from the national ones, but then there's a lot of number crunching as well. So creating, analyzing the data to establish these zones, and also create the zones that are needed for the more specific delivery plans, and then also inviting stakeholders to discuss those results, or those initial data results, to specify them more clearly, or rank the importance of these different areas. That was the old way that the schematic of all these stages were described. In the previous version, they had numbers, which sometimes makes it a little bit easier to discuss. So we often still refer to the policy and strategy work as the stage 1 work, and a lot of the data work is actually done in the sort of the stage 3 and the stage 4 work, where you combine the data on heat demand mostly, and just stock, and mostly domestic stock, because there's just more data available from that. So there's a lot of number crunching and making maps and GIS files in the first 5 stages. And it basically includes all the properties. So often local authorities will be used to maybe thinking about their own stock a lot, or specific types of properties that could, for example, be upgraded using the ESAB schemes. But really the LHEES wants to cover all the tenures and all the different properties, just as Stephen previously said already. And then, of course, you need input from important stakeholders, for example, the housing associations in the area. Do they have plans already in certain areas, or also sense checking certain data on, for example, in the Scotland heat map with the heat demand of certain properties, is that still up to date, etc., etc. Next slide. The LHEES considers 6 different considerations. They used to be called priorities, they're now considerations. So 3 of them focus on the heat decarbonization, which the first 2 here in this table are all about heat pumps, particularly, of course, in the off-gas areas where can LPG and oil systems be replaced by heat pumps, but also in the on-gas areas, maybe in the longer term. And then as the third consideration is heat networks, which will be a bit more interesting for the more urban local authorities than for the more rural ones. And the other 3 considerations focus on energy efficiency. Just because they are 4 and 5 doesn't necessarily mean they're of less importance, especially not if you think about the whole fabric first approach. That's often considered when we think about increasing energy efficiency of buildings. You probably want to increase the energy efficiency before you put in a heat pump, for example. But they make a distinction between just poor energy efficiency and also energy efficiency that could be a driver for fuel poverty in a certain area. And of course, that relates very much to planning fuel poverty alleviation funding in the local authority area for making energy efficiency projects happen or to drive them forward. And then the 6th consideration is a bit of a mix. It's you can call them hard to treat properties as well sometimes, because it might be harder to do work on them because they're listed buildings or they're in a conservation area. But also mixed tenure and mixed use are in that consideration. And the next slides, I'll talk a bit more about sort of the output that the local authorities get if they follow the methodology of especially the stage 3 and the stage 4 of the LHEES work. But normally all the results are put out according to these 6 considerations, which is why I was sort of highlighting them here. So when we think about the output, so stage 1, policy and strategy review. So as I mentioned before, it will be an overview of the council's priorities and targets, but also the gaps in their own policies and strategies when it comes to all the relevant issues around heat decarbonization and energy efficiency. And it should help to guide target setting and decisions about which areas to really prioritize in later stages. So for example, there might be, as a council, you might also have priority of geographically developing certain areas. That could be of importance, or really having very specific fuel poverty targets. What we actually do see often when we do a policy review or strategy review is that the targets tend to not be that specific in the local authority documents. Often they follow the same targets as the national ones. But that's the first phase. Stage 2 is the data and tools library, which is very much just getting all the data together. And there's a lot of different data sets feeding into all this work. So that can take a bit of time as well. And also sense checking certain data sets with more specific information that the council might have, for example. But there's not that much output from that stage. That's all in preparation of stage 3 and 4. So the baseline strategic zoning and pathways is very much a zone level output. So you can have intermediate zones or data zones. So if you work a lot with data, you might know that the data zone has about 360 households in an area, or properties in an area. So it could be 250, could be 500, but that's kind of the size of a data zone. Intermediate zones is usually a combination of 5 data zones, so it's around 2,000 properties. So for all those considerations that I showed in the tables before, you'll have a lot of maps, or you can make a few more specific maps, even lift out a certain tenure of the heat pump availability of all the social housing, for example. And they are handed over as GIS files and also as maps, as you can see an example here. And it's really to inform the delivery areas later on, but also the strategy document. So it's really to see, well, where in this local authority are there electrification of heat potential, where is it the biggest? Mostly focuses on the domestic, because there's just a lot more domestic properties in a local authority than non-domestic ones. Next slide. And then for the stage 4, which is a lot more targeted, so those are the generation of the initial delivery areas, and it's called initial because you'd want to discuss them with the stakeholders and internally and externally in the council as well. So there's a heat network priority analysis. So the output there is a lot of GIS files, but also a summary table to show where in the local authority there's a lot of heat demand combined with potential anchor loads. And generating these heat networks is very much a desk-based activity. So it uses data from the Scotland heat map, but it's not a feasibility study, for example. It's not going out to sites and doing a lot of more specific calculations, but it's particularly looking where are non-domestic buildings that could act like anchor loads, and in a cluster where there's enough of them. And then it's just basically analyzing what's nearby. Is there any, are there more is there any development planned nearby? Is there any opportunities? Is there waste heat nearby, or is there a river, which could be either a barrier because it goes through the cluster, but it could also be an opportunity for a river source heat pump, for example. So it's a high level analysis to identify potential rather than specifically planning for heat networks. And for the other considerations from that table with the energy efficiency and the heat pumps, we have a lot, it's a higher granularity than those data zones. So it'll look at the density of potential, and it'll also give a lot of output again. And those layers can also be combined. So for example, for certain energy efficiency works, you could first look at the areas that are not in those listed building areas or conservation areas, or where there's a lot of mixed tenure, which is maybe a bit more difficult. You can find the lower hanging fruit first. And then stage 5, building level assessment, which is a bit of a, I think it's a bit of a funny name, because it kind of suggests you would go out to some buildings and assess them, but it's very much just a way of calculating the costs and the potential savings of identified works. It's still very much a desktop activity, and that can then inform deciding from all the, because the stage 4 generates so much potential delivery areas where work could be done, whether it's heat pumps or energy efficiency works. You could use that information about potential cost and savings to rank in the later stages, well, for the delivery plans for the coming 5 years. Where do we really, as a local authority, need to be doing work to prioritize those areas? So in those later stages, so we have a lot of maps, a lot of numbers crunched, costs, potential, spatial data. That will then need to be considered together with the stage 1 work. So, are there any policies or strategies locally that should inform our choices for preferring works in one area over the other, but also, for example, plans that are already present at the local authority for delivering the ESAP scheme, or work that maybe housing associations are planning with using the social housing net zero heat fund, for example, but also some of the work is also just required. So councils, if they have their own stock, they need to comply with EASE 2, even though EASE 2 is, we know that those standards are changing, but they still need to live up to that. But also other local drivers or specific geographic areas that have been sort of pinpointed to be developed, or maybe regeneration of certain areas, that all can inform the short listing of these delivery areas, and also plans from other important stakeholders, not just housing associations, but perhaps the NHS or but also the DNO. So are there parts of the electricity grid that are restricted? So even if there's a lot of potential for installing a lot of heat pumps, it might actually not be that possible if that part of the grid is very restricted. So then you would prefer a different area. And also planned works for developing housing projects, for example, they should inform this as well. Back over to Stephen.
Thanks, Marjan. Hopefully I'm unmuted and you can hear me again. So yeah, so basically a kind of key insight to this and what we've found in delivering this over the last few years is that there are limitations. There are limitations on the data. Again, a lot of the data is based on home analytics for the domestic stock, and then on non-domestic EPCs. And sometimes the percentage of properties in an area with a non-domestic EPC can be quite low. So we have to consider that within LHEES, and a lot of the steering that it's giving us still needs to be sense checked on the ground. It's only giving us as Marjan said before, a kind of indication of what could potentially be possible within that area. But that then should steer the first part of the strategy and delivery plan to find out more where it looks like there could be opportunities. There's a big aspect of it in terms of that sort of multi-year support and thinking about embedding it into existing strategies and policies within a council and having dedicated LHEES office or a dedicated team that's focused on creating the LHEES, but also then actually driving it through. And another aspect as well, which is not really touched on within the LHEES because it's very much quite data heavy. They need to think about how is this all going to be delivered. The LHEES might identify the what can you do, what's possible within the properties and the housing stock, but it's not telling us how we can do it. So is there anything around partnerships or joint ventures, or, to create delivery vehicles to actually get this off the ground? Oh, got that. Sorry. So specifically on our side, because our specialism's very much on housing and domestic side, there is a big element of it where if we think about housing being social rented, privately rented and owner-occupied tenures, and that we need to think about the lower hanging fruit. And if you're a local authority, then the lower hanging fruit is, and key stakeholders to engage with, is going to be other housing associations. But within that data, all it's telling us is the tenure. It's not telling us who owns that property. So then there needs to be early engagement with social housing providers, other housing associations within the local authorities area to really get a handle on what the plans are. And we don't want to see one housing association looking at a heat pump project while a local authority at the same time is zoning an area for a heat network. And then when we think about the kind of building and the strategy side is within IS 2 compliance for 2032, and as Marjan said as well, and we've talked about the IS 2 potentially changing around that, and the ZEST report went to Scottish Government to question whether or not EPC B or for social housing is actually compliant. Is it compatible with net zero and get towards net zero? And then we look at sort of retrofit standards that might come in, such as PAS 2035, and potentially the accuracies of modelling to that level may well provide or open up more delivery models to actually see the work happening in terms of financial business models. So on that side, a last little touch on from us is that what we're trying to do is trying to think about in housing side specifically about this kind of pathway towards net zero, and it really is kind of focusing on the baseline aspect of it. So really looking at modelling of specific archetypes and identifying the potential measures and the costs of those measures so that they can then be phased in. So we're not then retrofitting properties to the point where we have to go back and re-retrofit them in a few years' time. We're actually looking at how can we have a nice clear path towards the best that property can be, and then modelling up options for different levels of retrofit across the properties. And then it's a case of considering funding and business model development. So how is this going to be delivered? Scottish Government funding, yes, but also do we have to try and leverage in private finance to be able to actually pay for the cost of it, bearing in mind that achieving net zero across our housing stock in Scotland is 40 odd billion at the latest estimate. So Then it's about developing that delivery strategy, which essentially has got to align with the LHEES itself. So it's going to be embedded within the LHEES. It's going to be the strategy for domestic housing. And then we think about what we can do in support of Changeworks is actually support the delivery of the programme and specific projects. And then really key to any of this is that the behaviour change aspect of it, and engagement with tenants and engagement with householders, and that has to be incorporated into the LHEES as well, is that there's going to be a lot of potential change in how buildings behave if we look at retrofit or whole house approach, or even just the difference between a gas boiler and a heat pump. And we need to be able to take householders and people working within the councils and within the supply chain and along with us. And then, which will tie in hopefully to the next presentation as well, is looking at that impact evaluation. So really looking at the impact of installing those measures and making alterations to the properties, and trying to get enough data back from those houses so that we can then bring it back into the first stage of the sort of baseline reporting and have a lot more accuracy there. And then the last bit's a little bit of our side is just, this is Changeworks' mission statement, of which it all fits within there. It's essentially allowing everyone to live and work and enjoy life with a low carbon impact. And that's us.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Marjan. That was brilliant. So good to see mixed tenure being involved in LHEES. I've just moved out of a tenement flat after 30 years because it was mixed tenure. It was too difficult to get people to all join together and look at retrofit and look at the repairs that needed to be done. So it is difficult for lots of people in Scotland. So it's good to see that that being dealt with, and of course behaviour change, because working with a heat pump, it's low temperature. It's a whole different way than you just shove on your boiler and it comes out really hot. It's just a whole different way of operating the system. So thanks for that. If I can get you both just to put your cameras off and mute yourselves again, and I will. We're going on to the next poll, and then I'll introduce Stewart from IRT. So obviously it's quite a technical job. We know that. You know, there's going to be officers working in all of the local authorities. What are some of the barriers? Where could we potentially offer support for officers working on LHEES? Is it, you know, data analysing? Is it, you know, understanding the energy, the heat performance, project management skills? There's obviously got to be a lot of engagement. You know, local authorities are doing this day in and day out, but this is on a scale, you know, probably that's just not been done before. You know, what other support can best be offered in terms of knowledge exchange? And obviously you've got Changeworks who do this day in and day out. You know, so we can always put you in touch with the right people. We're obviously trying to make sure that we support the Scottish Citizens Alliance and support local authority colleagues, because it's a massive task. So we all want to make sure that we're trying to help you as much as we can. Okay, so yeah, building stocks, energy and heat performance, that kind of building physics element, you know, that has been identified in a few areas now that we need to kind of upskill a lot of housing associations and LHEES. So we'll take that away. That's great feedback. Thank you so much. Okay, I'd like to introduce Stewart Little from IRT Surveys. Stewart set up IRT in 2002. IRT provide quantified unique images of energy which help clients to see energy loss and defects simultaneously and enabling an optimised refurbishment. So that is really to help that technical element that's just been identified, which is great timing. Stuart's overseeing the growth of the IRT and helps ensure that the firm remain firmly at the forefront of technology. So I'm going to pass it over to Stewart and he will give you some idea of how technology can help you with your LHEES. Thank you. Stewart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much to the previous presenters. That was really informative, and I hope everyone found it really useful. Can everyone see my screen okay? Is that coming through at the moment?
Yeah.
Take that as a yes. Good, good, good. So I've got a couple of bits and bobs I'd like to talk you through before I go on to the actual what we're doing for retrofit. So as Sarah said, we've been doing thermal imaging for 21 years. The company was recently bought by the Mears Group PLC, which has kind of added to our remit and given us the ability to do everything from data to surveying to PAS compliance to the actual retrofits themselves. Sorry, I think I might have COVID today, so excuse me. So there's a couple of bits and bobs we do that are a little bit different from the previous presentations. We do external thermal images en masse that allow you to red, amber, green your portfolio. So this coming winter, we'll be able to drive a vehicle down the street and image about 10 to 20,000 houses per evening, and then give you a benchmark portfolio in a beautiful 3D model with LiDAR images and thermal images and visual images all in one cost-effective package. Then we can work hand in hand with people like Changeworks and your DLO or your chosen contractor to say, look, why don't we go inside these houses and look at things like damp and mold? Because damp and mold's on everyone's lips as well as energy efficiency. And some of our clients are saying, look, we're really keen on saving tenants money and energy efficiency, but we've got a mandate from Michael Gove that says, thou shalt end damp and mold quickly. So we're kind of trying to be pragmatic about those two things and say, look, let's use some of your LHEES money to help solve your damp and mold issues. We can now go inside the houses. Now that I've got 6,500 colleagues and not just 7 like we have in Dundee, we can now go inside thousands of houses with smaller, cheaper cameras with local staff and take internal images and then back it all up and say, see the blue bits and the purple bits? That's damp and mold before it becomes a health hazard to the occupants. So my slides are advancing really, really slowly this end. So I don't know how to make it go any faster for you, but I've pressed advance a few seconds ago and I'm still looking at the same slide. So I'm assuming you're still looking at the same slide. Come on, computer. You realise it'll now advance 7 slides all at once.
Yeah, it's still the same slide, saying damp and mold from our side.
So I'm going to press escape and just progress it old school. That's moved on to disrepair claims, yeah?
Yeah, great, thank you.
So this is the other advantage of infrared. And I'll tell you how we got to where we got to with a very quick story from Aberdeen City Council. Oh, see, there you go. So Aberdeen City Council were our first big stock condition client. And we delivered 5,000 thermal image reports to them and said, hey, they're all your houses. And they came back and said, that's great, but they're just pretty pictures. And then we went away, raised venture capital, and we managed to turn pixels into pounds such that we could actually then show the tenants how much money, carbon and kilowatts they were wasting. So I knew this would happen. That was a big transformative change for us because it literally added value to the image and made it a much more compelling and engaging deliverable. So whilst in the bottom left you're looking at red being missing insulation. Sorry, this might be the last time. Obviously pressed that button a few times. This might be the last time it advances on its own. Bottom left, you're looking at missing insulation in red. So it's quite easy to see it, but we've now got the ability to say, that is now costing you X amount of money, which is kind of important. I'm really sorry about this slide advancing here, folks. So the thermal image is really good to say, look, there's the quality of the house. The data says X, the thermal image says Y. It's also an awesome tool to use at the end of a project to bookend the works. So that image you're looking at, or should be looking at, toward the middle left, the visual and the thermal are at the bottom there. What you're looking at in the thermal image is an external wall insulation that's been complete, but there's actually moisture getting in everywhere where you can see red and yellow. That's moisture penetrating that system. Image in the bottom right is just porous brickwork. Anything that's in red, blue, purple, green, yellow is all moisture in the system.
Stuart, if you just want to keep it in this form, we can see it. You don't, and then you don't need to keep clicking forward. If you just keep it in the pre-presenter form, okay? It might work. Right. Yep, we can see it fine from there. Perfect. So,
thank you. The little the system in the top right is just a little photograph of the roof-mounted system. So that's got 4 thermal cameras, LiDAR, and visual cameras on it. That's going to be mounted on the top of a MERS vehicle and driving down a street near you, hopefully, very, very soon. So we're launching a retrofit as a service with our MERS hat on, to all about just trying to accelerate and automate retrofit decision making. So I've always got a banner behind me advertising our DREAM software. that's something we can work with Changeworks with to actually try and automate the process. So our offer to market, if you like, our advice to anyone considering retrofit journey planning is treat it like any journey. We've got to figure out where we're starting from. We've got to agree what the destination is, and we've got to let data drive the decision-making process. Don't trust anyone trying to sell you anything. Boiler A, boiler B, heat pump A, PV, batteries, sun amps, graphene wallpaper, whatever it is, let data drive the decision-making process, not speculation or opinions. That's what we're all about. But the thermal imaging, again, I've got thermal imaging through and through. It does help you say, see the blue houses? They said yes to external wall insulation. See the red ones? They were right to buy and they said no. And it's so frustrating to see those 4 houses side by side and show the losses that are still occurring today. We do these surveys via drone as well. Doesn't matter how big the building is. We can fly drones up the side. We can do the roofs at the same time. It's quite simplistic. So just not to tread on Changeworks' toes, but we have a platform called DREAM that takes in multiple data sets from the EPC register, from your asset management platform. It aggregates them, it augments them, it sanity checks them, it flags up weird variances, and it runs it through today's version of SAP. Because SAP has changed a few times, as everyone on the call will appreciate. So if you've last looked at your stock 5-6 years ago, you will get different results if you run it through SAP 10.2. So there's 3 screenshots on your screen, hopefully on your screen. Number 1 is a benchmark of a portfolio, and you'll see little orange squares or rectangles on your screen. Those are actually all the different funding schemes that are available. So if you're looking to get LAD, HUG, Eco4, Eco Plus, all these type funding schemes, you just push a button and it runs your stock through that particular funding landscape. Screenshot 2 shows areas of deprivation. So the more red there is in the area, the more people there are in need of help in that specific area. The more green it is, the more affluent the people. And we've got the gas grid network built into that as well. So there is like a Venn diagram of these people need help. They are in fuel poverty. They're in EF and G rated homes. They're off gas grid. And once you've got that drilled down, you can draw a little polygon around it. And as soon as you draw a polygon, it says, right, there are 72 houses in that area that qualify for funding. And you move to screenshot 3, and it says, here's what you need to do to that house to get it to meet EIS 2 compliance, or hit a C or a B or an A rated, whatever you've criteria you're looking at. We've tried to make it as simple as possible, but it's always nice to do it if we can hold your hand. But it is important that you try and avoid that garbage in, garbage out scenario, and everyone's just honest about it. We, as if I take my IRT hat off and put my MERS hat on, we can then work with you as a consultant, put our arms around you and say, here's what we would do, here's the money that's available for you. And as MERS, we've got APIs into people like BuildBase, Juicens, Build Center, Plumbase, where we actually pick up today's costs for screws, bolts, washers, external wall insulation, heat pumps, lengths of copper pipe. All of that stuff is pragmatically pulled in, and it's bang up to date, which is awesome. The pictures you're looking at, the one on the left is half-filled cavities. The one on the right is actually for Lower Burn Housing Association down in Dumfries and Galloway. It's the best house we've ever photographed. It's absolutely perfect. So we do all the data bit to help you get started. Then we do thermal imaging to say, actually, the origin's a little bit further to the left because your data said the cavities were full. The thermal image says they're half full. And then we bookend the works at the end. But we can do the works themselves in a PAS compliant manner that's SWIGA guaranteed, Trustmark approved. We do the retrofit assessment, retrofit coordination, retrofit design. Do that in partnership with ECD architects in Glasgow. The quantification piece I mentioned earlier on, we can help engage the tenants and say, your house is the one on the right. We've done your neighbour's house. It's perfect. There's no red and yellow and white in the thermal image. But the money you're wasting per annum is £347. We can help engage the utility companies in that journey and say, by the way, we'll help you save 3.6 tonnes of carbon if you retrofit this house. And we can show them the kilowatt savings per annum from that. And again, we can bring along a suite of IoT sensors, that Internet of Things sensors, to monitor the actual impact. And that's probably the final piece to that jigsaw you mentioned, Stephen, is the ongoing analysis. But that's it. I just wanted to rattle through those slides nice and quickly for you. Apologies that jumped around like crazy. I've no idea what that's about. Never done that before. But I'll stop talking and take any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was great. Yeah, we're just going to get everyone to unmute themselves and bring themselves back off camera. Hi, Kirsty. Kirsty, my colleagues, joined us from the digital team. She's going to answer any of your questions as well. I've got some questions that have come through. So, hi, Stephen. I'm just waiting for Marjan to join us. Hello. And we're right on time. So we've got 15 minutes for our Q&A session. So I'm just going to read these out. Put your hands up if you got a couple on district heating networks. So how could higher density areas be primed for heat networks? For example, early engagement on actual heat demand and building an appetite in principle.
Yeah, I suppose I'll answer that one. Essentially, so the question. So if we're looking at how can they be primed, it is all about early engagement.
Yeah.
It's about early engagement, but it's also about having you look at how networks are essentially sold, because essentially the heat network and the provision of heat through a heat network is a service to be sold to prospective heat customers, and so it has to be of value to them, and so that takes quite a bit of the engagement and promotion of that. Now, it's much easier when you consider, and a lot of the heat networks and the identification of heat network zones with the local authorities are based around key anchor loads. And if those key anchor loads are council-owned swimming pool, council-owned office, and so on, sometimes they alone, just the key anchor loads, is enough to justify the investment in a network across those. And then once that's in and operational and people are aware of it, it can then be extended. And again, real life examples of this might be the Queen's Quay heat network for Western Bartonshire Council in Clydebank, and that one has some key council anchor loads which are being connected to the network. Then there's also a key NHS anchor load in a hospital, for the large hospital. But then also you look around it, and the potential next stage of extension will be to multi-storey blocks, which are just across the road, and some of them council owned, some of them other housing association owned, and so on. And again, it's taking those easier steps into it. And once it's in and it's operational, it's a much easier sell.
Yeah, and I'm going to chip in on the non-domestic side, as we don't have a minimum target set for any kind of EPC. We actually don't know on the non-domestic side what the heat demand is for a lot of the buildings. So it's starting there. It's starting with asset managers, asset owners. There's a change of regulation coming. You need to know how much energy your building uses, so that it can feed into whether district heating would be suitable. We do have our low carbon heat network called Heat Source. So hopefully Danielle could put a link to that in the chat. But anyone who's involved in district heating or wants to find out more case studies, please join Heat Source. It's a really good source of information. Okay, so how a common methodology could be achieved for appraising the quantity of heat available from rivers and estuaries?
I think if we, the Green Heating Green Spaces map that was made by Ramble with Green Spaces Scotland, they included rivers and some other water bodies. I think they, for example, excluded canals, because canals don't tend to not have enough movement in the water to be a good load for the water source heat pump. I'm not the heat pump specialist here, but I know of that data set at least. So if you would want to know of a method that would work, probably looking into the methodology of what they did with those water bodies and the green heat and green spaces data
I was
sets.
going to say that one, I just couldn't remember the name of it. So it's really good. If you haven't had a chance to go and look at that, it literally maps out all of the water sources, urban and rural, that are available in Scotland. Again, based on the data that they had available, good data in means good data out. So, you know, some areas had less available or decent data than others. If you haven't seen that, I'll try and get the link for that as well.
And the nice thing is that it does have a level of, it has quite a lot of variables in that data set. So you can be as conservative or optimistic with some of these, also a lot of green spaces, of course, because it's green spaces, but so there's different levels of the different calculations in there as well. So that's quite good.
It's a good one to use. Okay, so thinking about tenement flats, what is the legal position for district heating services that run up the rear external wall but bypassing any flat not using the district heating? Is this possible without permission? I doubt the gas networks have permission to run gas pigs back in the day. I don't know the legal position, but you would even have a job to do with engagement to make sure everybody who's in that tenement is on the same page. That's a massive, having had to do it for nearly 3 decades and it didn't quite work. You know, there's a massive engagement piece with getting tenements, even factor tenements are really difficult to get everyone to collectively agree.
Okay, I'll add to that, and that the Heat Networks Bill, which was passed last year, is that essentially has conditions within there which allow for leeways across property, and that's property and buildings. So, which is very similar to gas supply, and essentially, if it is to run over the outside of your property, then there is permission can be granted for that. So that's something which was passed just last year.
Good to know. That's great. In the standard LHEES methodology, is there sufficient weight given to electricity-related matters, in particular grid constraints that are likely to constrain the heat options available? That's a technique I'm not quite sure from us.
Yeah.
So, you want to take it, or do I take it?
You take it.
Yeah. So in the initial data analysis stages, the grid constraints do not play a part yet. So the way the methodology works is the heat demand and the property characteristics are all analyzed, which gives you all the potential. So is this property based on its energy efficiency and the current heating system, is that a sort of heat pump ready property or not? And that does not include any grid constraints yet, but the idea is that the DNOs share data with the local authority where the constraints are. And I know that the DNOs are currently quite actively thinking of local area energy planning, where they would want the councils to feed back their LHEES plans of where they are thinking of putting in a lot of heat pumps. Share that knowledge with both SPEN and SSE, and so that they can use the plans for their investments to the grid network.
Yeah,
but that's the big elephant.
Getting the data in the previous years.
That's the big elephant in the room as well, isn't it, about electrification? Because right now you cannot drive your car home from work, plug it in, switch your oven on, and sit and watch TV while you preheat the oven to put your pie and chips in, sort of thing. There's insufficient headroom. But we actually did a project in Glasgow surveying 500 tenement blocks to make the buildings more efficient, to highlight, look, we can free up headroom in the grid if we can improve the houses, and that will free up enough headroom to roll out electric vehicle charging through lampposts, that sort of thing for the residents. But that project we did just literally handed it over about 2 weeks before lockdown, and it didn't quite get to, I don't have a conclusion for it. We did all the pre and all the work, but no real outcomes from it yet. But as soon as we do, happy to share what happened.
Brilliant. Kirsten's got a couple of questions, I think. Sorry.
No, on you go, Stephen.
I was just going to say that again, it really highlights the need to look at a fabric first approach, and it's about demand reduction. We do not have the electrical supply, particularly renewable supply, that would cover the switch of all of our gas to the electrification of heat, even using high efficiency heat pumps. We have to address demand first.
Agree.
Great, thanks, Stephen. So obviously we did the poll at the start, and it was for those who need support in getting their data to a healthy state, what are the best steps to take at this stage? Anyone?
Healthy stage is that's a good one. Well, I think what's often a challenge for some local authorities is to have to manage their data in one place properly. So to have good, use the OSD UPRNs for all their addresses so they can easily be matched up with other data sets, and have a system in place where it's a lot of it is data management. Is about making sure that the latest version has all the latest EPC data and all the latest works that have been done to it, and the property details. I think sometimes some of the property data set with housing, which also is concerned with a lot of other things that are not about heat or energy efficiency. And then the planning for example, ABS project, which is the non-social sector, sits with a whole different team. So I think a central approach to improving. It's actually hard to answer this data without having seen the unhealthy condition of a specific data set. But I know everybody's stretched for resources, but investing in a good management of property, both domestic and non-domestic data, will and having knowledge of where some of the other data sets that feed into these things, like the heat map or home analytics from EST and all these things. It's it's not easy, but having a knowledge base also and
That's great, thank you. And we'll do, sorry, I'll just, for time, I'm going to put one last question on what challenges or opportunities do you see in the delivery phase of this?
Shall I give that a go as well?
Please do, Stewart.
Supply chain training, the massive shortages in those two. There just aren't enough people trained to deliver net zero nationally. And Marjan, yeah, I'd completely echo what you said about the data and everything else. I would also just add, collaborate and get people around the table from the asset management team, the data team, the repairs and maintenance team, get those people in the same room. Because we're on site with several projects live doing it, and you cannot engage the tenants early enough either. We've had tenants pull out because they won't let us move the Christmas tree in the attic. And if we can't move the Christmas tree, we can't insulate the attic. If we can't insulate the attic, we can't hit 50 kilowatts per square metre. If we can't do that, you can't get a retrofit.
Thank you. So I've just to round up there, we've got our last poll of the day before we finish. So what areas do you need support in? And this will just give us a much better idea of where all of us on this webinar could potentially support throughout the rest of the year with your LHEES. And then get on you go, Sarah.
Is it looking at data collection support? Are you looking for extra people to deliver the strategy? Always is the answer to that question. Are we wanting to help you get connected to other industry experts or other authorities? And we'll do some work in the background to come back to you with some solutions, maybe for the webinars. Yeah, that gives us a great idea. Yeah, connection, fantastic. We can certainly help with that. So yeah, thank you so much to our speakers. Thanks for everyone who put in a question. There was some that we didn't get to. We will come back to you and get those answers to you. Thank you to Changeworks. Thank you to IRT Surveys. We're going to send you out our little survey, but thanks again for being with us today, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Bye.